And good afternoon. My name is Ryan Belmore. I'm the owner and publisher of What's Up Noop, and you are watching What's Up Noop Live, where we bring you conversations with people from all over Rhode Island. We were focusing on politics for several months there, but now we are bringing you conversations with people from around Rhode Island. Frank Brosnitz from What's Up Noop joins me. Hey, Frank.
How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing okay, and you have picked today's guest. Tell me who and tell me why.
John Marion. He is executive director of Common Cause. Common Cause is probably now our major watchdog group over government on a statewide basis. Done an incredible job. John's been there a number of years. And if it were not for Common Cause, I shudder to think what would be happening statewide. But lots of initiatives that have been very successful. And they're a small group, but a very active group. And nationally, a very important group as well.
And John Marion joins us now. Hey, John, how are you?
Good, Ryan. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well, and nice to hear your voice. It's been a while.
Yeah. But thanks for having me back.
Of course.
It's good to have you here.
John, Frank.
How are
Oh, no. Frank, you froze a little bit there.
All right. How's that?
No, you're
good now. Unfroze?
You are.
Yeah. I put the heat down in the house. I didn't know what happened. No.
There you go.
Yeah. We are in a coming up to a new legislative year. When do they go in session? January 1?
January 3rd. So the first Tuesday of the month, I believe.
Expectations for this coming year and things that may have been left on the table in the previous year.
Yeah, I mean, it's like every time we have elections, there's, quite a bit of turnover in the legislature, even a leadership change near the top in the Senate. So you never know where priorities will shift statewide, and also we have a governor who now has a full term and probably sees a bigger mandate. For us, we're going to continue our main focus on improving elections in Rhode Island. So we're going to be pushing a constitutional amendment that would allow same-day voter registration. But I would expect that with a new Secretary of State, we'll see a whole host of initiatives around elections that will get behind. Some of them coming from us, and some of them coming from Secretary of State-elect Greg Amore. And we had a lot of turnover this election, so I anticipate there will be some fresh ideas from other legislators that we'll have to take a look at and see where we fall on.
Are there areas that were troublesome for us? I know that our ethics regulations are considered pretty good, but not foolproof.
No, and it's worth saying no ethics regulations are foolproof, right? There's always a balance that needs to be struck between, regulating potential conflicts of interest, but also, allowing people who have lives outside the legislature to participate in the legislative process. That's a difficult tension because we have a part-time legislature. Most people up there have day jobs, and those day jobs are going to bring them into conflict sometimes with their legislative duties, and where to draw the line there is a challenge. There are certainly, a few loopholes, I would say, that need to be closed. The most prominent for me, is the newly emerging recreational marijuana industry. Is just this week. Or last week, recreational sales started, and I think there is at least one loophole we identified where people can be off the books investors in those industries, which is against the law, but there's no punishment for it. So we need to come up with a punishment for that, whether it's an ethics punishment or some sort of criminal penalty.
A law without some kind of punishment is no law at all.
Yeah. If all that happens is you're required to divest from the business, there's, the only punishment is if you get caught.
Are there other concerns around the marijuana industry?
Yeah, so Common Cause has long been associated with the separation of powers issue in Rhode Island. We fought for that to be put in the state constitution in 2004, and that largely revolved around whether the legislature would get to name people to boards and commissions. And in January, I expect the governor to name 3 nominees for the new Cannabis Control Commission. And one of those is likely to come from a list from the Speaker of the House. We think that really violates, if not the way it's written, legally violates the separation of powers. It sure does violate the spirit of the separation of powers. What about 80% of the voters wanted in 2004 was for the legislature not to play a role in who gets appointed to boards and commissions at the state level. And we're seeing a little bit of backsliding on that, with a possible pick coming basically from the Speaker of the House for that 3-person commission.
I know there's something actually from Westerly that I thought was interesting. They had a charter amendment that passed that said that their ethics regulations were to be consistent with the state. Their ethics regulations were actually more stringent than the state. So there was, and correct me if I'm wrong, the 1-year waiting period for somebody who was in elective office and then accepting a municipal or statewide job. But there is an appeal that you can make under the state law. Under Westerly's regulations, there was no appeal. I'm curious, at least in my reading, there aren't very many exceptions when it comes to the Ethics Commission, where they in fact allow people to be able to take those municipal jobs before the year is up. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so you can apply for what's usually called a hardship exemption. And the Ethics Commission, on a case-by-case basis, weighs the hardship exemption. There have been some high-profile examples of them granting those exemptions. And I think people remember the exceptions where people have been allowed through the revolving door, we call it. But the vast majority of people just wait the 12 months until they qualify to go through the revolving door.
Yeah, I think people in Westerly felt that they could, one of their outgoing council people who were term limited might be able to apply for a particular job. And I'm not sure that would have passed the standards by the Ethics Commission.
Yeah, like I said, the Ethics Commission looks case by case, but I will say, as a general matter, I think many of these charter changes that we see, there were some very dubious charter changes put in at the very last minute in the city of Providence. One thing I'd like to look at is some of the issues around the timing of these going on the ballot and what information needs to be made public to the public before the election on the charter changes. So, cities and towns are not required to send voters anything about what's on their ballot, unlike the state. And I think that does a real disservice to voters in the 39 cities and towns. There were a whole host of charter changes in the capital city that people were scrambling to find, good information about. And so I think, I've talked to some other groups and individuals and legislators about the need to maybe require, information be published by the cities and towns about these charter changes.
John, I have a follow-up on that. We just had the school regionalization question in Newport and Middletown. Do you think that would fall under, mailing out to residents information about local questions like that as well?
Yeah, it would depend on how you craft the policy. But that's the sort of thing, that I think, could be put into a new policy. I think the cities and towns are going to scream unfunded mandate. But, let's be honest, as, sort of some of the newspapers have been shrinking, people aren't necessarily all, getting as much information as they used to about local government, notwithstanding new outlets like What's Up New, newer. I know you've been around for a while, emerging. We need to figure out ways to get people information about what's going to be on their ballot, and we also need to make sure that what is put on the ballot describing the question is accurate. There have been some folks saying that some of these charter changes, in some communities, they don't have to put the actual language that's going to change in the charter on the ballot, and that the descriptions submitted by the various councils, the Secretary of State's office, are not necessarily accurate of the change that's going to occur. I'm not sure what mechanism we use to solve that problem, but it's certainly something I think we have to look at.
Yeah,
So-
I could see that becoming a little bit of a mess. In the case of the regionalization, the town of Middletown was using all of their websites and platforms and social media and email lists to come right out and say, you need to vote for this. And now if everybody's getting that in the mail from a town, so it would somehow have to regulate where the town or city would have to just put out facts and not.
Yeah, so I'm not suggesting, requiring them to put out information to be pro or con. I'm talking more like what we see at the state level with what's called the voter handbook.
The handbook, yeah.
The voter handbook does not take a position on the statewide questions. It just puts out information about the statewide questions.
So I have a question about that information. So when I looked at the bond issues were specific, except for the one at the University of Rhode Island that said, we just want to spend $100 million on buildings. That's not adequate.
Yeah, I actually got some phone calls at the office with people having questions about that. That is put on there by the legislature. They did not include a lot of specificity in the resolution that put that question on the ballot. So that's an issue to take up with the legislature. The new Secretary of State, I'm sure, probably doesn't want this responsibility, but in some states, the Secretary of State plays a bigger role in sort of refereeing, so to speak, what information exists in that voter handbook. In some states, they put what they call pro-con statements. They actually get advocates for and against the questions to put an argument in the voter handbook. The group used to be called Operation Clean Government. It no longer exists. They used to put in a bill about that. That was an initiative of theirs. So there are lots of ideas how to get more information out there for voters, but that's definitely something I saw in 2022 was voters were looking for information and not finding as much as they wanted.
I thought it was really bizarre because when we looked at the green economy bond, it was just point by point. We saw where that money was going to go, and that was half of what this URI bond was, and it was all just very vague.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Agreed.
Ryan, you look like you're.
No, I'm good.
You have a question?
No, I'm good.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. It looked like you did.
Yeah.
I want to jump to something, then I'll come back. And as I think about this, of all of the institutions that we have nationally and locally, the one that does not have a code of ethics is the U.S. Supreme Court. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Common Cause actually has been banging this drum for more than a decade. We were the organization nationally. We were the organization that first discovered that Justice Clarence Thomas wasn't disclosing significant portions of his income. And about a decade ago, he had to revise his financial disclosure statements because of that. Subsequently, we found out about Justice Thomas's wife's involvement with, the effort to overturn the election in 2020. And he continues to participate in cases dealing with the January 6th investigation despite that. So, we are strongly in favor of a code of ethics that applies to all other federal judges, applying to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the question is who applies it, right? Right now, they recuse if they want to recuse, and nobody can tell them to recuse. So the devil is in the details about who's going to police that. But there are models at the state level where Supreme Courts, are subject to codes of ethics, and it certainly needs to be one for a binding one for the U.S. Supreme Court.
I'm presuming that we have a code of ethics for not only the Supreme Court, but other courts in Rhode Island?
Yeah, so all courts in Rhode Island are subject to a uniform code of ethics, and it's very similar to ethics codes for judiciaries in other states. And so it doesn't matter if you're on the traffic tribunal or you're the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, you're subject to the same ethics code.
It's been a lot of years since our last constitutional convention. Are we ready for one?
So, for people who aren't familiar, back in the 70s, they changed the state constitution to require that every 10 years, the voters be asked whether or not there should be a constitutional convention. And that occurs in the year ending in 4. So we're coming up in the 2024 election. Question number 1 on the ballot is going to be, should there be a constitutional convention? We haven't had a convention since 1986. A majority of people voted for that in 1984.
We lost you on that. You froze up for a moment. When was that?
Right. We haven't had a convention since 1986. In 1994 and 2004 and 2014, voters, did not choose to have a constitutional convention. No state has actually had a constitutional convention, a full one, since Rhode Island's in 1986. We locally haven't taken a position on the question yet at Common Cause, but I anticipate we'll take a position on that next year.
Has Common Cause had any reaction to the former president's tweet or whatever he calls his site on his position with the Constitution?
I don't know if we put out a statement about that. We were actually involved as an amicus in that Supreme Court case, Moore versus Harper, that was heard yesterday. So it's been a busy week for Common Cause. I'm not sure we had a chance to put out a statement about that. Of course, it's terrible to see anyone, let alone a former president, basically call for extra constitutional change. We are a nation of laws governed by a constitution, and we can differ about how to interpret that constitution, and we often do, but we all respect that constitution. And to say that we should go around the constitution and take extra constitutional measures is about the most abhorrent thing a public official or former public official could say in a democracy like ours.
John, you said that your initiative basically will revolve around the voter access, I guess, and in particular taking a look at same-day voter registration. Are there, first of all, how would that work, and then secondly, are there other initiatives that you're looking at?
Yeah, so same-day voter registration. What we are going to be advocating for next year is actually to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2024 that would just give the power to the General Assembly to set the registration deadline. So right now, the Rhode Island Constitution says that sets a 30-day deadline to be registered to vote, which is the longest deadline of any state in the country. And we'd like to see same-day voter registration. The first hurdle is, get rid of that 30-day deadline in the state constitution and give the power to the assembly to set a different deadline. And then we would advocate for a bill to set the deadline as same-day voter registration. The way it works differs. So there are 21 states in the District of Columbia have same-day voter registration. It differs in some states. You can register every day up until election day and on election day. In other states, there's kind of a quiet period, and then you can register on election day and vote on election day. That would be determined by the legislature. But that 30-day deadline was put in our Constitution in 1974, back when this was wholly a paper process, right? If you wanted to register to vote, you had to mail it to your local board of canvassers. They had to go into a physical paper file and look through like a card catalog and see if you're already registered to vote. This is all done on computer now, and it can all be done instantly. When you go to vote, you check in on an iPad. That iPad talks to every other iPad and every other polling place in the state of Rhode Island. So if you go to check in and vote in Newport, and you show up on the voter rolls and are marked as having voted, then if you show up in Providence where you used to live, it'll pop up on the iPad and say you can't vote. So we have the technology and infrastructure to allow for same-day voter registration. We just need to have modern laws. The reason we're pursuing it is that it is a proven reform that brings more people into the electorate. So the 10 leading states with the highest voter turnout, 9 of them have same-day voter registration. We in Rhode Island are usually about 25th amongst the 50 states in terms of turnout. We know that turnout would go up with same-day voter registration. We think as a government accountability group, elections are the main mechanism for accountability in a democracy. So more people participating in elections is good for accountability.
In those states with same-day voting, have they had more or less or similar amount of problems or no problems with voters or voter fraud?
Yeah, voter fraud is exceedingly rare. All the attempts to systematically look at it find a handful of cases. So, for instance, there were a handful of cases, 3 cases prosecuted by the Attorney General in Rhode Island from 2020, all 3 of which involved people voting in Rhode Island and voting in a different state. I'm not aware that there is any increase in fraud in states that have same-day voter registration.
John, I wanted to switch. You mentioned about the shrinking newspapers. If I'm correct, the law is still on the books that requires cities and towns to place their legal notices in print publications. Is it time to change that? For many years, we've opposed legislation that would get rid of that requirement. We were concerned about what's often referred to as the digital divide, which is that there is a ceiling on who has internet access, and there's a significant percentage of the population. I think in Rhode Island, the estimate's about 14%. Who don't have high-speed internet access, and how are they going to find out those legal notices? I would say our positions evolved somewhat because as newspaper circulations have declined, it doesn't necessarily make sense that they are going to reach that 14%. I think we're starting to look at it more as optional for newspapers versus online, or maybe during a transition period, sort of requiring both online and newspaper and phasing just to online eventually. I think technology exists to probably eventually get rid of that. I'm not sure we're there quite yet. I mean, I think one of the reasons it's there is I think that the print publications have lobbied very strongly to maintain that because it's a huge revenue piece.
Yeah, no, sure. You can go into the lobby tracker, it's called, and you can see who the Providence Journal hires to lobby for that. But there are still, I think, some good reasons for it to be in a physical newspaper. One of which is for archival purposes. So those newspapers are all available in the Providence Public Library, and you can go back and find them and find the legal notices. Once they're only on a website, one of the worries is that, the next time they update the website, you lose all those historical legal notices. And there is something to be said for, having sort of a physical archive of that sort of thing for people in the future who want to go back and see what government was doing.
A couple of other areas that I wanted to touch on, and one is wanting to have a constitutional amendment that would make the lieutenant governor and the governor run as one ticket, as they do in many states. Where does Common Cause stand on that?
Yeah, so we actually took a position on this, I think, last year for the first time, supportive. Basically, having watched the sort of, poor transition between the Raimondo and McKee administrations. I'm looking for the right word there, but in the middle of the pandemic, McKee came in and he'd largely been frozen out by the Raimondo administration from sort of the decision-making processes. It would be nice to see them as a team, because if they run as a team, they may govern as a team. And if there's turnover, it would be good for the lieutenant governor to have been read into, if not participating in a lot of those decisions. Look at Massachusetts. There's a big article in today's Boston Globe about how Charlie Baker appointed, the vast majority of judges in the state of Massachusetts. And it talks about how the lieutenant governor, who is a lawyer, unlike Governor Baker, played a huge role in vetting those judicial nominees. So I think, you can see when you work as a team, maybe it's a better thing. And so if you elect them as a team, they may work as a team.
I have one more issue I wanted to explore, and then certainly wanted to open up to any questions Ryan had for sure, and anything you wanted to add. And that's term limits. Looking at more and more communities that are putting on the ballot charter revisions that would require term limits, and that would switch terms from 2 to 4 years, so 2 4-year terms as term limits. That's not all as rosy as it appears, right?
Yeah. So for instance, I think Warwick approved term limits in its most recent charter changes in November. We have a position against term limits in state legislatures, and that's based off all the overwhelming evidence that they're a bad thing in state legislatures, largely because, especially for very short term limits, the staff and the lobbyists become more powerful and the legislators become less powerful. The institutional knowledge rests with the staff and the lobbyists and not the legislators. I think it may be a little bit of a different question at the local level. I don't think we have a position on that. And certainly we did support, as an organization, term limits for governor back in the 90s. So I think it differs a little in terms of the executive as well as the legislative branches. So it's more complicated, I think, than people on first blush think about. It sounds cliche, but I think the best term limits are actually competitive elections.
Yeah. John, once again, I lied. One more area I want to touch on: campaign finance reform. Common Cause have any positions?
Yeah. I mean, so Common Cause is long in favor of systems of public financing. The state of Rhode Island does actually have a system at the statewide level. It hasn't really been widely reported, but Dan McKee participated in the public financing system. Ashley Callis shoveled her personal wealth into that race. Dan McKee actually did it through our existing public financing system, as did, I think, most of the statewide officers. So that has largely been a successful system at the statewide level. We'd love to see it in the state legislature, but haven't been pushing it for a few years, in part because the state has been chronically running deficits, although not at the moment, in part because it's just a very difficult thing politically to try to organize around. But it's something we think is a solution to many of the problems of money in politics.
Ryan, you have any?
Yeah, mine is going to be well, I guess I have two. When I go to Common Cause website, I see that they're not in every state. And I wonder how they chose that they wanted to be in Rhode Island, and is the goal of Common Cause as a whole to be in every state across the country?
Yeah, so it's it's interesting. There isn't it sort of has happened organically that some states have had Common Cause state offices. Common Cause Rhode Island is the second oldest state in the country. Colorado started first, and we started second way back in 1970. It's just sort of a historical accident. You may remember a woman named Lila Sappensley.
I remember her well.
At Rick is named after her, and her husband John, who are no longer with us. They were among about a dozen Rhode Islanders who started a Common Cause chapter in the state, and we've been here ever since. New Hampshire, we've never had a chapter. The former board chair, talked about how his first internship at Common Cause was to go up to organize New Hampshire, and they still don't have a chapter, so he wasn't a very good organizer. We don't have a chapter in Virginia, but we have a chapter in Hawaii. It's really sort of been more of a historical accident where we've had sort of some strong activists in a state who have grounded a chapter, and then successful when they go to staff, sort of successful staff, like we did with the West here for almost 20 years. We were able to kind of build up that state office.
For those who don't remember Lila Sappensley, she was a Republican legislator who was, I guess, gerrymandered out of her seat at one point or another when she and Richard Leach ended up running for the same seat, but it's a long time ago.
Yeah. So, she was what you would refer to as a Rockefeller Republican back when such a thing existed in the 1970s, and was really responsible. She founded Common Cause and then became a state senator. Wasn't doing both at the same time. We're not partisan organization, so. But she was responsible for, the first open meetings laws and public records laws in the state, and a lot of the transparency that we've come to take for granted. Lila was really the driving force behind that in the 70s and 80s.
And my follow-up, Frank, for John was just, people hear about Common Cause. How can they get involved? What can they do with Common Cause Rhode Island?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. So, you have people serve Common Cause in a variety of ways. The most basic level is that they join our mailing list, which you can do at our website, which is commoncauseRI.org, or commoncause.org/Rhode-Island, as you have on the screen. And then we'll ask you to take a variety of actions, contact your legislator or sign a petition. But if you really want to get involved, physically involved, we do public events. In spring, we'll be doing our educational events. We call it Demystifying Democracy again, and you can come to those. In election years, we have volunteers we send to polling places around the state. to give information to voters. It's a nonpartisan election protection program. So if you get on our mailing list, you'll get invited to all of these things and all the volunteer opportunities. And then, of course, people serve on our board. We have a board of 18 Rhode Islanders. And you know, if you are interested in serving on the board, you can reach out through our website, and we can talk about that.
Excellent.
John, anything you wanted to add that we may have missed?
You know, just that, you know, we talked a little bit about voting and ethics. We work on a variety of issues, you know, and at the legislature. So it's you know, we work on ethics, we work on voting, but we also work a lot on open government, on issues of public records and open meetings. We work on issues of separation of powers. We work on issues around judicial selection. So we work on a whole sort of variety of what we refer to as process issues, you know, sort of how government makes decisions on our behalf. And so there's a little something for everyone, so to speak, when it comes to what we're working on.
And a lot of those discussed on your website.
Yeah, there's information on all those issues on our website. You know, and you can always reach me. You know, there's contact information on the website. Our phone number's on there. You can give us a call, and we'll pick it up, and we can answer your questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, John, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry I was late. My browser had a few hiccups today.
No, that's okay.
No problem at all. That is John Marion. He is the Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island. And again, commoncause.org/Rhode Island. And you'll be able to find it. Or you could just Google, as the kids say, and you can just Google for Common Cause Rhode Island. And you'll be able to find it there.
Great organization and lots of information on the website. I urge people to visit. And your question about how to get involved, it's a great place to get involved and to make sure we have open and honest government.
Excellent. Portland Sea Dogs is the
There
hat
you go.
of today. The hat of the day. If I
Hat
knew
of the
how to
day.
say, yes. So, all right, Mr. Prosnitz. Well, thank you for bringing us this conversation today.
Thank you, Ryan.
We will do it again soon. On behalf of Frank Prosnitz, all of us here at What's Up Noop, I want to thank John Marion, Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, for joining us. commoncause.org for nationalcommoncause.org /Rhode Island to get our local chapter. Thanks for watching.